Welcome to Scream Quest, a limited run horror themed offshoot of our regular podcast, Screen Quest. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Waterman, joined as always by May Finch.
Hello, hello.
Of course, we also have Will Rotondi.
Hey, how's it going?
And our very special guest of honor, author Isaac Thorne.
Hello there.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Very, very, very happy to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm excited to be here.
Now, as the guest of honor, Isaac, I would love to get a little bit of your background, specifically around the horror genre. What brought you to horror, and what is it about horror that you love?
Well, I've been into horror and horror adjacent media, I guess, since I was very little. My grandmother had some Alfred Hitchcock records and gifted me an album from the 70s that it was either early 70s or late 60s that was called Great Ghost Stories, which were these classic scary stories type pieces that were narrated by popular radio personalities of the time. And I fell in love with the scares. There was a version of the Golden Arm on that record that just scared me to death at the end of it. When you get the jump, classically you'd get a jump scare at the end of those audio recordings, and I would literally get up and run out of the room away from the stereo where we were playing that record. And it terrified me, but I absolutely loved it at the same time. And my mom would ask me, "Why do you keep listening to that? It scares you so much." And I couldn't explain it, but there was something about the thought that there could be mysterious forces in the world that could, help or harm, that those things that when you hear the house creaking and your parents tell you that it's just the place settling, that might not actually be the case. There's something thrilling about that for me. And from there, I saw the old classic Universal Monsters movies on TV, as a kid, and I didn't really get into reading horror until probably what's called middle school now. It was called junior high when I was a kid. That's how old I am. But I didn't get into reading until then, and probably picked up my first Stephen King book in high school and just kind of ran with it from there.
Excellent. So I promise no judgment here, but who's your favorite Universal monster? Do you have a favorite of those classics?
For many, many years, I wanted to be Dracula. So I thought it was Dracula for a long, long time. These days, I'm probably going to go with Frankenstein's creature.
Awesome. I've always been partial to the creature from the Black Lagoon myself. I don't know, something about the format of that movie. I saw it pretty young. I loved the sort of adventure aspect, the exotic locale, and like, oh yeah, really a lot of those. There's sort of that tragic element with it too that just resonated with me.
Yeah,
Awesome.
It is a much better movie than Dracula and even Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein is even better than Frankenstein, but I think the tragedy element in the creature actually kind of draws me into that one as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree on Bride of Frankenstein being the better of the two. Certainly such an interesting movie in a lot of ways. Well, on today's episode, we are going to be talking about a pair of movies again. The first of which is Anything for Jackson. And then a little bit later, we'll be talking about Evil Dead 2. Our topic of the show is horror comedies. So Anything for Jackson was Isaac's nomination for this episode. Before we dive into discussing the film itself, what was it about this movie that made you select it?
Um, I remembered it. I've seen it a couple of times and rewatched it again for the podcast. But I thought the unique thing about that movie was the older grandparent couple doing evil for a good, or what they perceive to be a good reason. And it's that juxtaposition of we're doing this and we don't, we're summoning darkness for this very good reason of saving this or resurrecting this young kid's life so he can live this life, and they don't see anything particularly selfish about it on their own part, because I think if they did, they would, not to spoil too much, but they would have resurrected the mother as well. But I think that's one of the things that drew me to it. Plus it's a really, for I believe it's an independent movie. It's a Shudder original movie, and it just kind of knocked my socks off with the dialogue and the effects and the pacing of it, and the unique take on possession and using dark magic and things like that. I thought it was a unique form of storytelling, and even though Shudder apparently isn't listing it under horror comedy now, to me it had some very funny moments in it, especially in the dialogue between Henry and Audrey.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree wholeheartedly, and we're definitely going to get into that here shortly. Just so you know, full spoilers are on the table. We tend to our audience knows, like, when we're discussing these movies, full spoilers are always on the table. So feel free to spoil away. Our audience definitely knows what they're getting into. But next, I want to go to Will and May to get some just general impressions, since it is your first time seeing it, and of course I'll throw in my 2 cents as well. Will, I'm going to start with you first. So what did you make of Anything for Jackson?
I'd say overall I liked it. I thought it had some good moments, some good little jump scares that come up at a couple of places throughout. I really love the casting. Isaac, what you were saying about the dialogue, I think that who they got to play Audrey and Henry were phenomenal. And I think pretty much made the film, just listening to them either discussing their plans or dealing with the consequences. And I think that especially for Audrey, who I want to say, sorry, I apologize, I should have her name up here, for Sheila McCarthy, just the way that she delivered some of those lines, those one-liners, I thought was awesome. And just we may or may not get to it specifically, but the scene with the teeth was really what got to me out of everything that happens in the film. So if we do have time to talk about it, I'd love to, but that when that came up, I thought, oh yeah, here we go. So, but yeah, overall, I liked it.
I was kind of blown away, honestly. I guess like I had slightly lower expectations, just knowing this was kind of a indie, like less talked about film from the last year or two. But that final image just sticks with me of Shannon in the car and staring at that creature. And I know we'll probably talk about the end later, but the elderly couple obviously shines, and the just very dry humor is very disarming at first. Like, I definitely thought this was going to be a bit more tongue in cheek for the whole movie, just based off of their dynamic. And I love that the movie disarmed me enough to be completely terrified and grossed out by that ending.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think the movie disarms you at many very key points, and I almost always fell for it, which is, I think, one of the highest compliments I could pay this movie, is that it got me, and it got me over and over and over again. I do think the performances were fantastic. I was really impressed with some of the effect work on this. Like, if you had told me this was released by, I don't know, an A24, which I know is like the kind of the next step between like a major studio and like independent, or even like a major studio, I would have believed you based off of just the effects alone. So I gotta say, this is one that I'll be recommending to fans of horror that I know, because I think it's a brilliant film in a lot of ways, and does a lot of interesting things. Originality, certainly, like through and through. I think choosing to have grandparents versus parents made this just automatically something that was a little bit different. I think just because of the age of the characters, and they have a lot of history together, so I think that all comes through. But, great. Well, let's dive into, since we are talking about horror comedies, I wanted to talk about so I'll be honest, I was shocked at how scary this was. Like, I think like my expectations going in weren't as calibrated with how scary it was going to be, and I think that's what made some of the moments that were funny that much more impactful and surprising. But let's talk about, I guess, like go around the table and some of our favorite, I guess, funny moments, or where you got some good chuckles. So again, Isaac, being the guest of honor, I'm going to start with you this time. Do you have a particularly favorite, like, funny part or line of dialogue?
I have a couple, actually. My favorite line of dialogue is when Audrey takes Henry out into the park and resurrects the dead bird there in front of him, and he gets this shocked look on his face, that this spell she cast or rite she performed from this book actually worked. And he looks at her and he says, "You can't just go around bringing things back to life." And she says, "Well, I've been doing it all day." So I thought that was funny. Yeah. And there are little moments throughout there, like from the very beginning. I mean, the movie opens with him getting ready to, it looks like he's getting ready to go to work, and she's straightening his tie, and they're just doing the normal couple morning. And they go out the door, and then the very next instant they're dragging the screaming pregnant woman back in the house. So the scary moments and tense moments have some comedy to them as well, just because of what you were saying, Chris. Is the unexpectedness of it is what kind of makes you laugh, even if it's not an outright gag. I
just remember one exchange between Audrey and Becker, or I guess Shannon, where they had just chained her up, and Shannon is like understandably like hysterical about what's going on and says something to the effect of like, "Oh God," and Aubrey just looks at her very casually and says, "Oh no, we don't say his name here," or "Oh Jesus," or something. And that was sort of like her immediate response is like, no, we don't use that name here. And that just like the absolute casualness of how they had planned all this out just really, I thought was very very humorous despite the circumstances.
Yeah, we don't use that name in this house. Like, it's almost like when you were younger, you go over to a friend's house to play, and you weren't sure of what the boundaries were for like some friends, you could say butthead at their house, and that might be a big no-no. Like, even something like that was a transgression depending on whose house you're at. So yeah, no, I love that.
So the top comedy for me was definitely the moments between Audrey and Henry, and like Will pointed out, Audrey scolding Shannon for like cursing around the baby when they're reciting demonic rites around the baby. But I think two other ones for me were, one, just the comedic timing of a lot of the moments that move the plot forward, like Henry trying to put the pieces of Rory's body like buried in the snow right when the policewoman calls him, and he's like trying to like talk in a composed manner, but he's just absolutely horrified with himself. I also appreciate it's subtle, but the nurse that does scheduling in his office always seems very exasperated with him, and like the way she gets very upset when he tries to kind of flippantly be like, she rescheduled, just communicates to me that he's always like this. So that was funny.
I think probably for me, the two moments that really stood out was when the cop, the homicide detective, commits suicide. There's just this look of exasperation on his face for like, oh my god, like now another thing to deal with. I haven't even cleaned up the guts like out in the front yard. Like you could have layered the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme over that. Like like it was just very, I don't know, I like, it's something about the expression was just brilliant, because like he's not even horrified, he's just exhausted at like the prospect of the consequences of this. Which I think tells you a lot about his state of mind and how little time he's had to process all the things that have happened very quickly to him. The other little touch is also kind of around the matronly demeanor of Audrey, where she puts like the hand knitted like I guess you would call it padding around the handcuffs, because it feels like the most grandma thing in the world, but it's very sinister. Like it's so sinister, but also like it's very, I don't know, like sweet in an odd way. I don't know how to explain it, but that really made me chuckle because it looks ridiculous. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about and I think here's your chance, Will, in a moment. Kind of going to, so horror comedies I think are one of my favorite mashups, because you get to laugh and enjoy some of the absurdity, and then you also have all of the aspects of, you know, potentially being terrified or grossed out that come with a horror film. So let's talk about the other side of it, which is the horror side. Are there any moments that really got to you or got you, whether it's jump scares or like just made you exceedingly uncomfortable? I'd love to hear that. So
the trick-or-treater got me. And I mean the teeth got me as well, but the trick-or-treater got me more because it was just relentless, and you know, whatever door Audrey closed against it, it was at the next door, and then when it's in the house, all of a sudden it's this giant and impossible to get away from. You know, so no matter where she went in the house, she couldn't escape it, and couldn't even get out of the house because it was blocking every exit. So I thought that was pretty terrifying.
yeah, absolutely, especially when you learn that like the significance of the costume and what that signifies and their past, I think. And I think we established a couple of episodes ago, I've decided big tall stuff like really freaks me out, and this is a phobia I didn't know I had until I've seen some recent horror films that I won't spoil for maybe people who haven't seen them, but I'm just like, no, something about that really gets to me. So Will, tell us a little bit about that teeth scene, or you can pick a different one if you'd like, but
let's talk about teeth, Chris. It's cool. No, I have so, and this is the, I think part of the reason why this scene really got to me as much as it did is I don't know what the term is for it, but when you watch certain things or hear certain sounds and it affects you in a certain way, anytime I've ever watched somebody brush their teeth in either a TV show or a film, there's something about that that just makes my mouth itch. And I can't tell you what it is. It just weirds me out. And so that automatically, listening to somebody continuously, in this case, flossing, although I didn't realize that at first until the, you know, the little twist reveal, is that was already kind of getting to me. But then when you see like what you think is Audrey, I'm sorry, standing at the vanity, and suddenly you see like a tooth fall to her foot, and I thought, oh, this is gonna be good. Like I'm already kind of, it was already weirding me out before, man, psychologically, but now it's like, okay, so what's it gonna be? How bad is it gonna be when she turns around? So that to me was the build up to that, I think, was more disconcerting than the actual surprise at the end. Just from kind of being a little desensitized myself to seeing a lot of like practical effects for body horror or any sort of physical damage. But I think the lead up to it was great. And again, maybe because of just the fact that I'm built a little bit different for certain sound effects, or if it was just like the way they set it up, or both, that was what really did it for me.
Yeah, it's given me a new phobia that I didn't know that I had for flossing. I already am bad about flossing, and now I'm just like, oh, I can only imagine the next time I go to floss. Like, yeah, that's just what I need popping into my head. It's teeth popping
That's
out.
your new excuse, Chris.
There we go. Yeah. Go to the dentist and they yell at me. Listen, have you seen anything for Jackson? Like, I feel like I'm should be let off the hook here.
Nice.
Starting with when Detective Bellows, like just her ghost on repeat, just walks up, shoots herself, drags herself away, walks up, shoots herself, drags herself away on repeat is when it's really started kind of like settling in for me. But I think the worst moment was just you're promised from the very beginning of the film when Shannon's kidnapped in the first few minutes that there's really no hope for her. She's not going to escape. They've thought of everything. And it's at the moment when Henry's given up and tells her to run that you're finally given a bit of hope, like, oh, she might actually make it out of here. And her then walking through the house and having all these ghosts chase her was actually terrifying suddenly, because that hope was at risk of being snatched away from me. So that was kind of like my most heart-wrenching moment, I suppose. And then like I said earlier, I'm still stuck with that very last image of the thing in the road.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the ending, you know, to kind of wrap it up, because I think it's a very interesting ending, but yeah, it was bone chilling for sure. It's funny that you mentioned the detective that is killing herself in a loop, because I agree, it's definitely like horrifying. Also gave me one of my biggest laughs when she like walks to the like threshold of the door and then like it's just like and walks away.
I know.
Just thinks better of it, I guess because of the salt. It was just, I don't know why. Like,
Also,
it made me laugh. Sorry, go ahead.
I also like the bit. That's all right. I also like the bit where Ian arrives and the detective walks in on repeat, and the response is, she's been doing that all night.
Yeah.
Very quickly desensitized to it. Yeah. Okay, so for me, as far as like terrifying parts, it has to be the contortionist, like twitchy Spider-Man. I don't really know like what to call that entity, but the way that it moved and the sounds and the plastic bag over the head, something about that just gave me the willies. And I could be mixing this up, but isn't that the one that takes a bite out of the pregnant belly as well?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that was just like icing on the cake. Oh boy. Yeah, I did that thing. I did not like, but it was effective. So I do kind of want to talk about the climax of this, because I think, as May pointed out, it is super interesting and bone chilling, particularly like how it's to be, I guess, interpreted, and I don't know, just like what you made of it overall. So Isaac, how do you interpret the end of this?
I've never been absolutely certain what the intention was there. In some ways it feels like they had to end it with something thrilling, and the best way to do that was to allow her to think she had escaped, but not really. So the impression I get from it is the whatever has been unleashed is with her now, and can follow her. So that's what I took from it.
Yeah, that's terrifying and totally valid.
You know, I don't really have much more to add to it than that. It was sort of the same way that I read it. And I feel like kind of in the typical horror style where you think that things may be resolved, and then there's always just that question mark of, well, maybe, but things are never really going to be the way they were before, even if they're kind of okay, at least temporarily. And so whether that's just because now she can see, you know, these entities that are in the world, if more came through, or if there's still more, you know, trouble to come, you know, it just kind of leaves it hanging there for potentially more, or just as sort of the ending, I guess, feeling for that film. But yeah, not really much more to add to it than what Isaac had.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting that there's this look of relief that crosses her face after seeing this figure. So to me, like it's I don't think we'll ever know for sure exactly what the figure means, but I think her interpretation is interesting because I think she sees it as, okay, the demonic entity is there, so it's not in my child. But there's that was a wide open gate for quite a while. I think there's a strong possibility that her kid is still haunted just by something else. And for me, that's kind of the final scare and horrifying possibility.
Yeah, she glances down at her belly, and well, I had a couple of questions. I couldn't tell, like, because it's a fairly quick shot. Is it implied that maybe the baby is gone? Like, does her belly look smaller? Like, I couldn't decide that. I should have rewound it, but I was like, I'm gonna leave this open ended specifically for the discussion of the podcast. So, what do you think of that, really quickly, and then I'll give my thoughts. But
That's another thing I've never been sure about, but I see I actually got the same impression you did, that it seems like that some of the relief she felt wasn't just the escape, but that, you know, the baby was not there anymore.
yeah, and I think that's like all the more. I mean, so that was my interpretation as well. But I was like, now I'm second guessing myself here and everybody else's. But like, I think that makes it all the more horrifying because it's there's the relief that the baby's gone, but the demon problem kind of remains. Yeah, obviously it's appearing to her, and you could interpret it, I suppose, as like she looks down, the baby's gone, she looks up, sees the demon, and it's sort of the demon's way of telling you, like, we got your child. Sort of, I don't know, gloating in a way, signing off on the deed, as it were, which I find really chilling. And I suppose if you're going to go with that interpretation, you could take it a step further, and when she sees Jackson in the window, perhaps that is the abomination, you know, made corporeal. You know, she doesn't realize she's lost the baby at that point, and what she's seeing is actually the result of what this was all for. Which again, pretty gnarly stuff. Kid's got a hell of a mess to clean up. If he's the one that's going to inherit that house, I'll tell you that.
Oh no.
Well, good stuff. Anybody want to add anything for final thoughts before we take a little pause and draw a side quest for our guest?
Just that I would add this to my top horror films list now. Thank you very much for the suggestion, Isaac.
Absolutely.
That's pretty high praise. I'm sorry if I spooked you at like 11:30 last night. I wanted to see. We have a little group chat going. I wanted to see who had seen it, and I was like, oh boy, this is more intense. Just fair warning than what I was expecting, and we were going back and forth, and we tried not to discuss too much like ahead of the podcast, but I needed somebody to confirm that they had seen it and see if I was overreacting. But I also I loved it. I'll agree, mate. It's top stuff. All right. Well, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna draw a card for Isaac, and if we have time, we'll go around the table. Some of these topics are a little bit more succinct, probably in answers than the others. So here we go. Ooh, this is an interesting one. So the card we drew is hard pass, and the prompt is as follows. Talk about a horror film that you'll never bring yourself to watch under any circumstances. And of course, Isaac, as the guest of honor, if you don't have those boundaries, that's fine to say so. But if you have an answer, I'd be really curious to hear it.
I have a couple of boundaries, actually. I will not watch Cannibal Holocaust. And it is not because of the cannibalism. It is not because of, the fake gore and things like that. It is because of the real life animal cruelty that occurred. And I mean, I can watch a horror movie where an animal dies or gets hurt, as long as I know that it wasn't real. I love Cujo. I love that movie. It's one of my top favorite Stephen King adaptations, and that dog goes through hell. But as long as I know that it's done with movie magic, I'm okay with it. Cannibal Holocaust, I don't think I could stomach.
My answer is the same exact one, so I'm going to piggyback off of that.
Wow.
That's probably the only one. And just reading sort of like the description, like in the Wikipedia page, or like some of the other entries in like IMDb for like warnings, I was like, nah. Which is interesting because I can do Apocalypse Now, which has the real life slaughter of a I forget what type of animal it is, but I think where I can do some mental gymnastics is that, like, I know that's like a traditional thing for the tribe, and they like ate the animal and used all the parts, so it's tough, but like it's not like just for, I don't know, the shock value alone, right? Like there was an actual purpose behind it. Wasn't, in other words, just done for the movie. It was just something that they captured while they were filming. 100% on the same page with you there, Isaac.
So I got tapped out of Saw maybe about 6 films in, and I feel like I'll just never watch another one after that. I think I got tired of them trying to like create some sort of reason for there still to be all these, traps and this setup that somehow was masterminded by someone who died like 4 episodes back, or 4 or 5 films back at that point. But I think for me, it was just always trying to up the gratuitous violence and over the top, just gore factor that really just, I think I got so saturated by it. I was just, I hit tilt, and I didn't really feel compelled to go back to watch more of it. So that's pretty much where I'm at with the franchise. I really enjoyed it when it was like you saw less and it was more just disturbing and sort of that initial film, even maybe the first couple. And I tried to hang tight for the few that came after to see how they might try and do like a cool twist. But I think just the body horror really got to me.
You made it 3 films farther than me. I stopped at 3, and not because I was particularly bothered by it. I found it like just wasn't interesting anymore. I think like anything about those films that were intriguing, like just to me, like quickly just evaporate. Like, no, that's just personal taste. But I just where I thought like the first one was very smart and just like an all-time great, there was a diminishing returns happening for me personally in terms of like, I don't know, like the substance that I wanted, I suppose. But I like that.
I'm fairly sure I've talked about this on the pod before, so apologies if this is an old story, but
No problem.
there is a single movie I've ever walked out of, and it is the new It. And I generally have like a lower limit for like very graphic body mutilation, but just when it's with kids, man, like even if like mentally I know that's all special effects and stuff, it's just I can't stomach it. So I will never finish the new It, unfortunately, as much as we love Stephen King here.
And what I found interesting, since Isaac didn't hear this story, and maybe some of our new listeners may not have heard it, was I thought for sure it was the opening, and it's not. It's the kids that are carving into the belly a little later on in the film, correct? That's the scene that
Yeah, I mean, I think it
this-
also is a cumulative thing. Like,
sure.
if it just been that opening scene with the arm, it had its shock value and I could have moved on. But yeah, the stomach scene was also a lot longer and just, yeah.
Unfortunately, even though it's a great film, it's hard for me to recommend without a huge disclaimer another Stephen King adaptation, which is Doctor Sleep, because it's not gratuitous per se, but there's a very long drawn out scene where a child is being tortured for like the pleasure of these like psychic vampires, and it is very, very, very hard to watch. Very hard to watch. So steer clear of that one. I will say. Well, great. Thanks for sharing, everybody. Now let's transition to Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn, which is just one of my all-time favorite horror comedies. I suppose we can go around the room and again, just sort of initial impressions. If you have a history with the movie, if you've seen it before, you can talk a little bit about that. So Isaac, I know off mic you were saying you hadn't seen this in a while, but you had seen it before. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's been years. I actually have Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness all on DVD, and it's probably been at least a decade before since I sat down and watched Evil Dead 2. So I popped that in last night and was watching it, and I thought, this is very much a movie, comic book, Three Stooges thing. It's a horror comic and a superhero movie even, and a Three Stooges movie all rolled up into one. It's very over the top, intentionally so, and that's what I love about it. I only had one complaint with the movie, and that was the retcon in the very beginning. I never understood why they did that. I'm sure there's a reason for it, but yeah, I still love that movie after all these years, and it's a good one to sit down and just turn your brain off and enjoy,
Yeah, absolutely. For the retcon, the only explanation I've been able to kind of work up my brain is maybe they were concerned because this one had quite a bit more of a budget and distribution and things like that. Maybe they were concerned people hadn't seen Evil Dead 1, so felt obligated maybe to do a little catch up or something so that people would be more inclined to see it or roll with it. I'm not sure, but I do agree with that because Evil Dead 1 is great for a completely different set of reasons. Will, have you seen this before, or was this your first time? And what did you make of it?
So that's actually, I'm glad that you asked that question because I haven't seen it before. This was my first time. I'd seen probably bits and pieces of Army of Darkness just when I would channel surf way back when I was a kid. So I've never actually seen any films in this trilogy. So for me, my question actually is back to you, which is what was the retcon from the first one to this one?
So essentially they like the first 10 minutes where you've got, I think Linda is the girlfriend's name. That whole bit is like a very truncated, scaled down version of what happens in the original Evil Dead. So it's almost like they're rewriting history a bit to catch you up to like, and maybe give a reason for why the Necromonicon is being used, versus like he's got to have a reason to come back to the cabin and blah 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 blah. So that's accurate. Isaac, do you think that's pretty much the gist of it?
Yeah, that's I think that's accurate. There were also, it was more than just Ash and Linda at the cabin in the first movie, and the first movie was nowhere near as much a comedy. There were some comic elements to it, but it laid on the horror pretty thick.
Yeah, it's almost like incidental, and I think like I don't know, my internal canon's always been that he realized he had gold. You know, maybe like going back and seeing some of the stuff that was and just decided to lean into it. I have no idea if that's the case, but I'm glad that he did regardless. So May, how I'm sorry, Will. So to get back to you, because we had to kind of cross wires there. So what did you think of it? This being your first time, before I skip right over you?
Well, it's pretty much what I expected, which was that it was really campy, really cheesy, over the top, intentionally over the top, and Bruce Campbell just absolutely hams it up, and I loved it. I loved that part of it because that was what I expected to see out of it. And I feel like the first thing I ever saw Bruce Campbell in was probably like The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. back in the day. So I knew that he was always like into the campy sorts of, never really taking things 100% serious, which I liked. And then just seeing him pop up every now and again for cameos in Sam Raimi stuff, whether it was Spider-Man or, any other little like nods here and there. So I liked it for that. I liked going back and being able to see, having seen other Sam Raimi films, being able to kind of see where he started out. And I guess to some extent, this is what we talked about when we talked about Slither with James Gunn, where you sort of see where a director started out doing certain things or trying certain camera tricks and how that evolved and later influenced the work that they would do later. So whether it's like the up close, like the really up close shots on people's faces, lots of eyes, a lot of eye imagery, or just some of the practical effects that are used for like the horror aspect or some of the creatures that pop up. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, overall I enjoyed watching the film.
I enjoyed it a lot. I think I would have appreciated it more in like the context of other 80s horror movies, but knowing what I do know, it was still quite enjoyable. It dragged on at certain points for me, but I found myself laughing at like the smaller visual gags more than anything else. And I did appreciate just how committed it was to using every single applicable horror trope in an hour and a half. And the dialogue too. Like there wasn't a single line that I didn't groan at, which is impressive in a parody.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I mean, it's one of those movies I think that like it may not be everybody's cup of tea, like, to some extent, but I feel like it does have pretty good mass appeal because like so much of the comedy is like physical comedy. In fact, I would put Bruce Campbell up there, especially in this movie, like with some of like the greatest of the greats, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton. The stuff that he does is unbelievable in some of the scenes, just in terms of like how brilliant the physical comedy is. And I think that's probably the aspect of the movie that I enjoy the most is the physical comedy. And just seeing Bruce Campbell in Evil Dead, the original, and then to this, and really just like I don't know if that was just all natural talent or if he had like a choreographer or a coach or like stunt. I don't know, like if it'd be a stunt coordinator maybe for something like that. But if he managed to do most of that just based off of Raimi's direction and knock it out of the park that much, like kudos to him because it's brilliant stuff. And of course we'll talk about it I'm sure to close it out, but the end I think is like one of the greatest setups for a sequel ever too, but we'll get there. So same format, we'll keep the same format. So I guess starting with like the funny stuff, is there a particular standout scene? So I'm gonna pitch it back to you, Isaac.
My favorite funny moment is the possessed hand. That is the most slapstick part of the movie in my opinion, and watching Bruce Campbell fight with his own hand that's trying to kill him. Just I honestly I could have watched half an hour of that. I thought that was absolutely hysterical.
Yeah, I agree. The hand is it's like a way more of a pain in the ass version of what is it, Thing from Addams Family.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Man, you have to go with the hand. It's great. I mean, just the fact like when Ash gets knocked unconscious for like a hot minute and the hand just like looks around, well, apparently can look around or sense that there is the cleaver that's like, you know, so many feet away and just pulls his whole body to get closer to it, and the little like sort of gremlin sound effects that it has when it's like, you know, just chatting to itself while it's struggling. I thought, oh, this is great. I cracked up. Or like when the hand is actually severed and then Ash has the shotgun and he's trying to aim it, you know, because he's got one, understandably so, you know, you're trying to aim with your other hand, probably not your good hand after you've lost the one that you that would be. And it's just kind of like tapping its fingers on the ground, the hand, as it's waiting, you know, like, come on, you know, are we doing this? You know? So that, yeah, I have to copy you, Isaac. I love the hand. It's great.
I mean, I do think that the hand wins hands down, but
Hands down.
Ayo.
I did want to point out, I tweeted about this too, but it's just after dismembering his girlfriend, the zombie girlfriend, I should say, with a chainsaw in the shed, he leaves and just like as if he just like was about to be forgetful and thinks, oh, whoops, he just kind of like gently reaches over and locks the shed. I don't know why, but that just killed me. Just committed this horrible violence and then says, oh, nope, I should be tidy and close the door and lock it.
Yeah, it's definitely the genius of Bruce Campbell at work there. Like he can be so earnest and then so silly from scene to scene, and he plays that pretty straight, which is great. For me, ever since I've saw this for the first time, it's the fucking moose on the wall that's like, like laughing at him, and like all the stuff that's laughing, and then Bruce Campbell's laughing maniacally. I don't know why that always tickles me, but I think it's just it's such a stupid brilliant like effect, because it's pretty decent animatronic or puppeteer work, whatever that is. And it's just it's so unexpected the first time that you see it that it always gives me a big old belly laugh. I would say kind of second place for me is the just complete abandonment of anything logical with like the sort of like reveal of Ash in his like final form with the chainsaw like on his arm and the shotgun, and he's twirling it around. I think I mean if you don't have a just a nice like surprise you know, delighted little chuckle at that, just how silly it is and over the top, I don't know what to do with you, but great. This one I feel like is decidedly less scary, comparing the two films that we're talking about this episode. Are there any aspects of it, though, I'll go around the room again, that you did find like, I don't know, gross or like scary or uncomfortable?
There are a couple of bits that used to scare me when I saw this for the first time. I was probably a teenager. And saw it on cable, but so there are a couple of things that terrified me then that don't terrify me as much now, that I would probably find funnier now. One of them is the headless dancing deadite girlfriend scene, which watching it now is hysterical to me, but watching it back then, just the way the kind of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Large Marge way the stop motion works in that is incredibly creepy to me. And Linda's head in the vice, I thought was still scary, even though you can see the transition from effects head to live actor. Now I thought that was a particularly scary moment.
Yeah, I love the stop motion work. That's an excellent choice. Really, really good stuff.
I'd say mine would just be a short and sweet answer, which is just the idea of anyone chasing you with a chainsaw is just, that to me is terrifying. Just the idea of a chainsaw cutting into you, like taking it beyond the camp factor of this film and like really thinking about it, that disturbs me. But yeah, that's got to be my pick.
It's the sound, right? Like that's the
Mhm.
thing. Like, you know, when Michael Myers is stalking you with a kitchen knife, it's not making, like this horrifying roar behind you. I think it's good. That's a great choice.
For me, it's like a knowing this movie was going to commit to its tropes. I wasn't really like all that scared or surprised once it was clear, like, okay, who's the final girl and who's the final guy going to be? All right, cool. But in the middle, when Annie and her boyfriend and the other couple like all enter and have their initial kind of skirmish with Ash, and then the zombie comes up from the cellar, and there's like that really chaotic moment where they're fighting the zombies and also still wary of Ash. I think that's the only moment that I actually like got kind of anxious because I had no idea where it was going to go. And that was quickly followed just by like the grossness of Ash just taking an axe to the people who'd gotten bitten.
Great. Yeah, that's a pretty like genuinely tense scene where he's trying to get up through the cellar door in a way that I think a lot of the scenes aren't really in this movie. Like there's some genuine suspense there. The fiddling with the lock and all that. I think that's a great sequence in general.
Yeah. Also, I would argue with you slightly. Well, I do think like axe is slightly scarier than chainsaw, just because
Oh,
it's more visceral. It's not like a one and done thing. You got to keep hacking. That's
You gotta want it with the axe. You know what I mean?
nice, nice.
That's all I'll say.
Yeah, for me it's the eyeball going into the mouth, popping out of the head. It's simultaneously funny, but it's also like the grossest version of oops, I just swallowed a fly. And it is so Sam Raimi, like, and just there's a similar gag in Drag Me to Hell, which is if you want to see kind of like what Raimi in the 2000s, like, kind of going back to his horror roots a little bit, that's a great companion piece to this. And then it has very, similar, like, gross and funny bits, but there's a very similar gag involving some dentures, and that's all I'll say. I'll leave it there. So you can discover that on your own. But yeah, the eyeball in the mouth thing is funny, but it's also just disgusting. Because I just imagine it going right down. I don't know why. That's not logical, but yeah. Let's kind of close out the Evil Dead 2 discussion by talking about the setup. Were you surprised by the transition? And Isaac, I know like me, you'd seen this before, but like, if you can think back to your first time, like to like the medieval cliffhanger, and what did you guys make of that?
Yeah, I didn't expect there to ever be a third part. The first time I saw that, because Army of Darkness was not a thing yet when I first saw Evil Dead 2. I just kind of assumed that they wanted you to they wanted the audience to feel like, okay, there's the potential for more to this story, or there could be other stories, but we're not necessarily going to give you a payoff on that. That said, the traveling into the past thing, I think had more promise than Army of Darkness. Not sure what the word I'm looking for here is, than Army of Darkness was able to accomplish. I've never been a big fan of the third film, but yeah, I mean, I like the ending now. I wasn't so sure about it the first time I saw it.
Yeah, it certainly comes out of left field, and I'm kind of with you. Like, I think Army of Darkness has some charm, and there's some really standout scenes in it, but it's the one I've watched the least out of the three of these. Like, one I've seen quite a few times. This one I've seen a billion times. It's like perfect movie to throw on when you're carving jack-o'-lanterns or something. But yeah, I would tend to agree with that.
Well, I guess going into it, so when we talked about this film a week before, and I thought I'd seen bits and pieces from it, and it was actually Army of Darkness that I had seen bits and pieces of. Part of me was always waiting for those scenes to happen in this film, because I went into this cold, like not reading anything beforehand, not trying to prep myself. I'm like, I just want to go in and, watch this without any expectation besides what I'd had from, when I was a kid. And so that to be about halfway through, I thought, okay, well, that's not going to happen in this one. So obviously that's going to happen in the next one. And that's where I sort of thought, okay, well, maybe I wasn't sure if they were going to like tie into that, but when it did happen, I thought, oh, okay, I see exactly where we're going to end this. And then the next thought I had was, this feels almost like the end of Back to the Future Part 2, like setting up your final, your final film. So, on the one hand, I thought it seemed like it was kind of an interesting way to wrap it up, to get everybody pumped for another one. It's too bad to hear that maybe that third part didn't really stick the landing as well as they thought it might. But yeah, I liked how it ended off, because it's sort of, I imagine at that time was not something you would have expected, that it would have just been kind of like, okay, he's going to go through the portal and then what's going to happen after that. And then when it ends on that note, you're like, oh, okay, wow, interesting. There's a couple other films that I feel like have probably taken that ending to repurpose that, because I feel like that's shown up in a couple other more recent films. Like I feel like when they redid Planet of the Apes, I got that same kind of vibe. Chronicles of Riddick, at the end of that, I got kind of the same vibe. So I like the idea of throwing a protagonist sort of into the middle of something that seems kind of out of left field, and then where you want to take it after that. But again, like, kind of like what we've talked about already, you put up a lot of expectation with that you're really that you hope the payoff's gonna be great. So but yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to discourage you. I think it's a journey worth taking like once to see Army of Darkness and kind of make up your own mind. If I remember correctly, they had some challenges with, like, that was in development hell for a long time, and I think even the making of that was not a particularly fond experience in memory for Sam Raimi, if I remember correctly. I might be making all that up, but I seem to remember reading that it had a bit of a troubled like pre-production and production. So that would kind of make sense if the end product wasn't quite, there. Sometimes that'll come out, sometimes it makes a even better movie. Again, not to bring up Apocalypse Now twice, but that had a similarly troubled production, and it's like one of the greatest movies ever. So you never know.
Yeah, no, I thought it was perfect, very fitting. I think that it didn't beg for a sequel necessarily, because to me it was simply a callback to very early in the film when he's first meeting the archaeologist lady, and she shows him like an ancient painting of the hero that fought this evil energy, and it's very clearly someone dressed in modern day clothes. I was like, okay, that's going to come back. I'm not sure how, but that's going to come back. And then it did at the end. So it was very fitting to me. And I think just it also fit the theme of Ash really not catching a break, and also about this whole film kind of making fun of horror movies and teaching you not to care too much about any one of these people. It's like even your protagonist like doesn't make it out to rejoin his normal world. He's stuck back in, the medieval times now. Sorry, Ash.
Yeah, he doesn't have the best of luck. That continues in Army of Darkness, and then of course there was the show that I'll admit I've only seen a couple of episodes, but enjoyed what I saw. Ash versus the Evil Dead. It seems like he is doomed to eternally fight Deadites and deal with the mess that comes with that. So
his name is Ash.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, I think almost everybody said it. I think it's, in context, it's a pretty interesting non-conventional ending, and I think it really kind of brings it home. It's cool. Like, I like that they laid the groundwork for it with the page and the ancient book, and it's a great way to either have a cliffhanger ending or just a really memorable, like, even if that's where they had left him, cool. I think, like, there's enough tied up loose ends that it's kind of interesting place to leave them if that's what they had chosen to do. So yeah, I like it. Well, as we wind down the podcast, I did want to take some time to speak to Isaac. You have a new novel out, Hell Spring, right?
That's right. That's right. It was released on September 21st, so it's out and available from me or wherever you buy books.
Now, I've had a chance to, I'm a little under halfway through, and this is the first of your books that I've read, and I'm really enjoying that. And I hope you'll take this as a compliment, but it reminds me of like some early like Stephen King works, and that it's very regional, and you've got this really great setup where you're bouncing back between these characters in a small town and their points of view. And I think it's really interesting. And again, I mean it as a total compliment, but I get a lot of like early King vibes from it, and it's just it's doing me right now for October.
Well, thank you very much. I actually do take that as a compliment, because Stephen King, of course, with anybody, you know, my age and younger, into reading horror, he was a huge influence, and I prefer, typically, I still read, you know, everything the man publishes, but I actually prefer the older stuff that that uses the multiple points of view style, you know, and really goes into character. One of the things I've always loved about his work in particular is how character driven it is, and still is, but more so back then, especially with things like The Stand and It. But yeah, so I don't consciously try to emulate his work, but he is a huge influence on me, of course.
Now, speaking of the characters, like that's what really kind of hooked me, I think. And you have, shall I say, a very unconventional version of Hell, sort of the prologue. That boy, it blew me away. I was like, wow. But then, like, once you settle into sort of the rhythm of the what's going on in the town, and what each of these characters is sort of privately going through, I thought it really adds to the terror and sort of the anxiety I have, because I've gotten a chance to know them a little bit, and where all their individual circumstances and suffering has kind of brought them into this nexus brought on by a storm. So tip of the hat, it's just like you hooked me from page one, and like I can't wait to continue reading it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that the first chapter you mentioned there has actually become a bit of a gatekeeper on that, on that novel. There are several people who have read the first page even and been like, nope, not for me, you know.
Oh wow.
Close the book and put it down, which is fine. I mean, you know, that is absolutely fine if you can see that early that something is not to your taste. Absolutely put it down. But but yeah, it's the rest of the book is quite different from that first chapter intentionally. Yes. So but you do need the first chapter, and if you haven't connected the dots on that yet, you will if you're halfway through it. But yeah, so the book, by the way, is even though it starts in this kind of Hieronymus Bosch hellscape, is actually about 8 people in a small town called Lost Hollow, which is my sort of Castle Rock, because I've written about Lost Hollow before. My previous novel was set there, and a few of my short stories have been as well. But it's about 8 people who are trying to get away from a horrific weather event, or trying to shelter from a horrific weather event involving thunderstorms and flash flooding, and they get trapped in their local general store, and they each have these secret shames they're dealing with, on top of a demon who feeds on shame, who is also sheltering in the store. So they have to kind of come to terms with themselves in order to try to beat the demon. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Beautifully put. Yeah. And boy, I like I said, I got to tell you, I can't wait to, number one, finish it, but I will share a little anecdote with you. So sometimes when I'm relaxing at night, I'll read in the tub, and my wife came in and she saw it on my face. I won't say the exact, I don't want to spoil for anybody, but you'll know. There's a scene involving a finishing nail. That's all I'm gonna say. Good enough. And she saw it on my face. She saw it on my face. So there's a compliment for you. Like my my horror was laid bare. My wife goes, "What is happening? What's the matter?" And I was like, I explained what was happening, and she was like, "Okay." I can see
that is awesome. That is both awesome and something that I should apologize for.
No, please don't. It was memorable in the way that some of the best scenes in any horror book I read are certainly not leaving my head anytime soon. So but yeah, I encourage our listeners, like, buy it direct from Isaac if you can. Isaac, do you have a website? Is it just your isaacthorne.com, or what's your URL?
Yes, isaacthorne.com, and that is Thorne with an E. So isaacthorne.com will get you straight to my site. And if you don't want to buy direct from me, that's okay. There are links to other places there as well. But if you buy direct from me, you can get a signed edition along with some extra swag in the box I ship you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I again can't wait to finish it. I encourage all our listeners, like, check it out. It is it's been the perfect companion. I always like to get into the Halloween spirit by picking a horror book and reading outdoors once it starts to cool off. And this has been just a pleasure to read for 2022. So thank you for obviously appearing on the podcast, and thank you for the good spooky times. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm very glad you're enjoying it, and thank you for having me on here. I appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. You're welcome back anytime. We don't normally just stick to horror on the podcast. We actually have a selection of films and topics that we've sort of gamified. I don't know if you've had a chance to check out any of the YouTube videos, but we draw a random card on our virtual game board, and that dictates the next week's episode for what movie and what topic we're going to be talking about. So you're welcome anytime if you'd like to come back for a little bit of chaos and film chat.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right. And as for the rest of you listeners, you can engage with us on social media at ScreenQuest Pod. On Twitter, we will be posting our next poll very shortly. Our next episode is going to be Slasher Sleepover, so more to come on that. As always, we encourage you to get on there and vote so you can decide one of the two movies we'll be talking about. As always, we thank you for listening. Please give us a like, share, and subscribe. Telling a friend is always very helpful. We grow by word of mouth mostly. And until next time, we love you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.